Thank you, everybody, for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Justin and Lynn, for all of your help. So this is one of two sessions that we will be having. This one is on what global warming is. And then next week, we'll be talking about can anything be done or is it game over? It's not game over, not yet anyway. So there's quite a bit that we really can do. Oops.
You shouldn't have any problem. Is it not clicking back and forth now? There you go.
No, it's a little slow. So first of all, a little bit about who I am. First of all, who I am not. I'm not a climatologist. I don't work in the area of climate modeling and those kind of things. But I am an energy expert, and I've spent a good deal of my career understanding various aspects of energy. And if you need to know anything about global warming, energy is the key. How we use energy and the fact that it creates greenhouse gases. I've been following the global warming technical and popular literature for 30 years, maybe more. I hate to think about that, how long it's been. And in the old days, I was very concerned about global warming. The data was, a little spotty, but the trend was really clear. It was really clear that we were going to have difficulties in the future. And so it became part of, well, basically my life, my professional life, not the only thing, part of my life. I also happen to be a Jets football fan, so you can see the kind of life I have. So it has been a big part of what I do. And then sort of one thing sort of led to another. So, realizing back then that global warming was real and significant, I couldn't understand why people at that time wouldn't agree that it was significant. And so that led me into another chapter of my studies, and then it's how people make decisions, why they deny things, and so on and so forth. So it's sort of like, a cascading event of things that I had an interest in doing. So in addition, and also, I'm a pretty okay communicator. So I thought that with my technical background, I could understand the concept very well. And then with my abilities to speak and write, I could maybe make it very open and available to people that maybe don't have technical backgrounds. I do work in the global warming arena apart from my energy work, sort of around the perimeter of it. So I work in things like spent nuclear fuel processing, those energy conservation, recycling. In fact, one of the projects I have is with Los Alamos National Labs, where they're taking and trying to encapsulate spent nuclear fuel in glass. And one of the things that I'm providing is a system to measure the glass properties. And in fact, Andre, you're very familiar with it. It's LIBS, laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy, that we're using. Andre, now retired, is well-respected, I should say, because you're no longer in the arena, but was a well-respected world leader in the LIBS community. And I know Lucy is not going to like this, but love to get you back.
Oh, thanks.
So that's basically who I am. So I'm here to neither comfort nor alarm people about global warming. That's not my goal here. My goal is simply to give you facts, to give you the truth. It's not going to be colored by political agendas, by the culture wars, by I'm not going to make a run at your emotions, nothing like that. I really want to give you the benefit of my 30 years of studying global warming and the concerns that I have about it, and open that up. Now, another thing is, I don't want this to be a monologue. I'd rather really this to be interactive. So, if you have any questions or if you have any comments, nothing is off limits. So please raise your hand. I just ask that you be succinct and get to the point very quickly. And if there are no comments, then I'll be calling on everyone here.
I would also add, try and talk one at a time, or it gets really garbly on the recording and for the people listening on Zoom.
Yeah, so Wendy, if you have any comments, just raise your hand or put it in the chat box and it'll come to me. So let's see if we can get this to advance. Well, I guess that concludes my talk. If there are no questions, I don't really look.
I don't know, it was just working.
All right, let me try something real quick.
Okay, we got it, but
Now try it.
Point at the screen.
on the screen. Where's the pickup? Where's the receiver?
It could be right from here.
Well, all right, so you could always advance it if I can, right, Justin? Okay, so,
Can't see it.
I did for a second.
by the way, this, I did write a book on it, mostly because I enjoy writing, but I thought with all of the knowledge that I have, it would be good to put it into a somewhat entertaining book. And you could find it on Amazon, on the publisher's site, Bentham Science, soon to be on Barnes and Noble. Okay. There are,
Gonna get an autograph, you should help this book up.
yeah, there's a copy here, by the way, if you want to take a look at it.
So you're the guy?
And if you buy the book, I'd be happy to autograph it. It's like a painting, though. The autograph books are worth much more after the author dies. So I hope there's no real value in my book for a long time coming. So there are really 4 parts to the book. The first is talking about why people deny global warming, what we can do about it, and uncovering the truth from fiction. So I'm not going to discuss that. Second part is the what and hows of global warming. So one chapter in there is this meeting here. It's about basically what is global warming. And then the science behind global warming, and then what we can do about it. So next week, we'll be talking about what we can do about it. And if you would like me to discuss any of these other chapters or things in the book, just recommend it to Lynn, and I'd be happy to consider it. Next, I guess you're going to have to do it because I can't. Yeah, if you're interested to learn more, you can take a shot at that. And there are some handouts here which have that. Also, my business card if you need to contact me. And if you can't find me, Lynn could always find me.
Yeah.
Oops, something just disappeared. Okay, so first of all, what's global warming? Who can tell me what global warming is? And anyone here? Anyone? Somebody? You're right in the center. What's global warming, sir? All right, I'll go with you then. Even better.
Well, I know it's not the weather, but the overall trending of heating the environment, I would describe it as global warming.
Yeah, all right, that's pretty good. Anyone else?
Averages.
Averages? Batting averages?
Well, yeah, that too, but the general increase, though some areas seem to be decreasing.
Well, that's very true. It's not uniform, certainly. But if you look at the trends, there's clearly an increase.
I think it's more carbon dioxide buildup in the atmosphere, which is acting like a greenhouse effect.
Yeah, that's a very good one. And, show of hands, who feels confident that they understand global warming and what it is? Yeah, got a little one there. Oh, okay. Andre does. Not surprising. All right, well, let's try it again. Okay, next, please.
It just went.
It's just jumping real hard.
Yeah. Okay, so basically global warming is an increase in the Earth's heat content, which rising temperatures is a symptom of global warming, but it's not global warming. It's basically the Earth is sitting there, it's getting heated by the sun, it's emanating its own heat out, and when that balance goes off a little, there's more energy going into the planet than it can release, and so it heats up, like you push up the thermostat, and so what happens then is that the temperature goes up, and it's all so interconnected. Your temperature goes up, the ocean heats up, and I'll talk more about the ocean because it's absorbing more of the CO2 and temperature than the air. So then your storms get bigger and stronger and so on. So global warming is happening. Next. It is happening now. And is it Annabelle? And Annabelle is responsible.
Of course.
Sorry, I had to out you. And next, and we are all responsible, clearly. There's no hidden, evil that's out there that we can't find or can't see. Yeah, the fossil fuel companies are certainly giving us all the fuel that's creating all of the greenhouse gases. But listen, we're the ones that are burning the fuels. We're the ones that choose to pick our leaders. And so it's everybody in this room. We're all the victims, but we're also the perpetrators. Okay, now we got there, but that's okay, we're good.
It's my finger.
Your finger, okay. There's a couple of slides that are out of order, but I felt they were important enough to discuss. When people's beliefs, when their meta beliefs come under attack, they don't always act, well, people rarely act logically, at least in terms of what we see. I mean, they're acting logically within their own beliefs, but we have different beliefs, they seem logical to us. But nonetheless, people will try to stop it. They will try to do things that get their beliefs back on the level. And so when global warming starts to occur, and the more it occurs, then we're going to start thinking, many of us, okay, well, this can't possibly be happening, and it's not right. It goes against everything I believe. It goes against, it could be my religious beliefs. It could be my beliefs in that no harm will ever come to people, and so on. And so we then think about, well, maybe we need to have a new type of leadership, something that will alleviate my concerns, and something that will give me perhaps a scapegoat and so on. And that leads to putting our democracy in peril. And you see it around the world many times. I think we're starting to see signs of it here in this country as well. Did you say something? Oh, okay. So just, global warming certainly will lead to any kind of problems, will lead to that as well. Next. So I'd like to talk about a triple. So I have 3 categories. In each category, I have 3 things. I just like the number 3. Next. So 3 dates that you must remember. Next. Okay, 1750 more or less. Can anybody tell me why that's an important date, was an important date? Anyone?
Industrial Revolution.
Coal burning, yeah. Oh, sorry.
Industrial.
Yes, thank you. That was the Industrial Revolution. That's when the British rediscovered steam, and what they found, yeah, you get a star. Yeah, what they found was that if you boil water, I mean, the Chinese discovered that years and years ago before that, but if you boil the water, it expands, and if something expands with great force, you could move it, and you could start building machines, and it's led to the great wealth, and also, all of the advances that we've had. It was really the beginning of modern technology, but it burns fuels, and that's the problem. And back then, they were burning a lot of coal, a lot of wood, and so on. Next. 1896, unless you're a cognoscenti of global warming, you probably don't know what this is, but I'll just throw it out there.
Automobiles.
No. Well, actually, I don't know when did Ford start his automobiles, but no. Next. So that's when Svante Arrhenius, a Swede, won the Nobel Prize for his discovery that CO2 causes global warming. So let's think about that for a moment. His peers believed that his work was the best work throughout the world, and he was awarded the Nobel Prize for that. So we've known about global warming since 1896 and its effects. In fact, what he recommended, what Arrhenius recommended is we burn more coal, because I think we were going through a mini ice age back then, and it was cold, and so he says, hey, let's put more CO2 in the air. So, be careful what you wish for. Even before him, there was a woman named Eunice Foote, and what she did back in the 1850s, which was like a decade before our Civil War, she took 2 glass containers. She filled one up, pumped in CO2 in one, and air in the other, and she put thermometers in each and put them out in the sun, and she saw very quickly that the one with the CO2 increased in temperature above the one with air. And there was other similar experiments after her that did that, but Arrhenius was the first one to actually quantify it. And he even made a prediction that let's see if I have it. He was a little conservative, but he predicted that if the CO2 went up by a factor of 3, then the Arctic regions would increase by 8 or 9 degrees Celsius. So he wasn't far off. And 2050, the last 3 of my 3. Anybody know what 2050 will be? So that's the date where the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has stated that we must stop all CO2 emissions to keep our global temperature below 1.5 degrees centigrade. And there's nothing magical about 1.5, it could be 1.7, 1.3, but it's close enough. And if we go above 1.5 degrees centigrade, then there are going to be some very significant problems that we're going to have. Personal opinion is we're never going to make it. But we got to at least come as close as we can. so that we can mitigate the problems as we go forward.
What about the CO2 that's emitted naturally?
Good question. Okay, so there's CO2, let's say before the Industrial Revolution, CO2 is being emitted in the air because trees and vegetation would die, they would decay, and then the CO2 would be emitted. So what happened was other trees and other plants and vegetation would absorb that CO2 and they would grow. So back around the Industrial Revolution, we had a perfect balance. Now, we still have that.
But what about that, wasn't it a volcanic eruption that caused a bunch of CO2 this past year that was in the ocean someplace?
And I don't know. I don't know about that one. That could be.
But I suppose any volcano that erupts is going to emit CO2 with all the heat.
Yes, in fact, I'll talk about that in a moment, but that's quite true. But the point I was going to make is, so we still have that balance where in fact, we're burning a lot of forests and all that, but we still have that. But on top of that, we're also putting in CO2 ourselves by burning fossil fuels. So whereas we were and could still be in a balance with whatever we produce is absorbed, now we've gone beyond what the vegetation can absorb. And so every time we burn something and we create a molecule of CO2, it doesn't get absorbed, and in fact, which I'll explain later, it stays in the air basically forever, for centuries. It doesn't disappear like other molecules.
So I suppose that another point there too, from the ecologist perspective, is that we keep mowing over forests and
Yep.
turning them into asphalt and homes. So that probably doesn't help either. If you,
No, that's a big problem. Deforestation is a very serious problem because not only are you losing the ability for plants and trees to grow and absorb CO2, but when you burn them, they create their own CO2, getting more into the air. And then if you allow them to regenerate, they don't always regenerate the way they were originally, and they become less effective at absorbing CO2. So deforestation is a crucial issue. Next. Okay, so I just talked about that. Okay, so 3 keys you must know. Next. So CO2 causes our planet to heat up. Next. Burning fuels always create CO2, and as I just said, never disappears. There are 2 elements within a fuel that's responsible for its energy. One is carbon and one is hydrogen. And so when you burn a fuel, the oxygen in the air will combine with the hydrogen to produce water vapor, which is not harmful, but it'll also combine with the carbon to produce CO2, which, as you all know, is very harmful. And the more carbon the fuel has, the worse it is. And so natural gas, which has CH4, so it's got 4 hydrogen atoms to 1 carbon atom, is not quite as bad as coal, which has far more carbon atoms than hydrogen. So coal actually produces twice as much CO2 as natural gas, and that's why it's sort of the redheaded stepchild of fuels. Yeah.
Quick question. You said CO2 never disappears, but the plants absorb CO2.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So that it doesn't disappear
Well,
into the plant.
exactly correct, but the plants can only absorb what has been naturally occurring when other plants disintegrate and they burn and so on. We're adding more CO2 than what's naturally occurring, and we don't have enough plants and trees and things to absorb that. And so the excess is what's not being absorbed, and we're responsible for that excess.
Are you going to address carbon capture technologies and the work that's being done there? Because as I understand the way you've described the equation, if you can take CO2 out,
Yep.
deposit it in the ground, or in some way remove it from the atmosphere, that's the same effect as stopping burning fuel.
Absolutely, and in fact, that's part of my discussion next week, so it's a good segue into my next week's presentation. But he's quite right. The problem with CO2 capture is that it's a developing technology, and we're not quite sure where it's going to be, and it takes energy itself to capture the CO2. So they're basically, to get ahead of myself, there's a suite of technologies and things that we can be and should be doing, and carbon capture, in my view, and I think in yours as well, is one of the critical ones. Was there another hand here? Okay, next, and then, 3 keys, the last key, nuclear renewable energies don't create CO2. So they're clearly, some of the technologies we should look at. Next, 3 things we must do. Number 1, understand global warming. That's not very simple. And I don't mean Well, you need to understand what I'm discussing, the facts and all. Certainly you need to do that, but also it needs to become part of our beliefs. It needs to become part of, not just, okay, I know 2 + 2 is 4. I know burning fossil fuels will create CO2. But do I have an emotional response to that concerning my children and my grandchildren and so on? So it's sort of like if you're a Baltimore Orioles fan, you can't possibly root for the Yankees, right? And it doesn't matter how well they do. You know, I could tell you for a fact that the Yankees have won 1/4 of all championships ever in baseball, and no major sport team has ever done anything close to that. So by facts, you should root for the Yankees, but of course you can't, because our beliefs won't allow it. You know, because we're fans, our friends are fans, and so on.
So what happened to the term climate change?
I prefer global warming. I think climate change is a better term because it's more encompassing. But I prefer global warming because I think it's more impactful. Climate change to me sounds a little neutral. It's just a matter of taste. I just prefer global warming. Climate change, you know, Armageddon, use any term you like, they all work. Okay, next one, so we got to stop burning fuels. And third one, yeah, and we need to choose leaders. None of this is going to happen unless we choose the leaders that will propel us into what we need. Okay, next. So let me take the 3 best of the 3 threes. Next, 2050. That's the only date we really need to be concerned about. The other dates, you know, don't worry about those. They're in the past anyway. Well, not so quick. But in any event, burning fuels heat up our planet. And next, so we got to stop it already, or remove carbon and other things. Okay, next. So the impacts. Next. So the past 9 years have been the 10 warmest years on record ever. So between 2014 up until 2022, well, the hottest records, there was one in there that goes before 2014, I forget which. I think it was maybe 2010. Hottest on record, and that's, you know, if you want to project some. Gesundheit. The 1980s was the hottest decade on record. Next. Hello.
We're trying to mute something.
Okay. Until the 1990s surpassed it, and then the 2000s came along. Not so fast. Follow my lead.
I don't know your steps yet.
Yeah, okay. Then the 2000s came along and beat the 1990s. Next, and you guessed it, the 2010s took the crown, and now our present decade is beating them all by a lot. So you can see where we're heading, and it's not very good. Next. 97 out of 100 climate experts, and I want to stress climate experts, think that humans are changing our global temperatures for the worse. And when I say by climate experts, what I mean is people that are professionally involved in climate activities. So, and they don't have, and they're neutral. I mean, they're being funded by universities, by the NSF and so on, which doesn't have a dog in the fight. So that's a pretty big percentage. Try and stay with me. Okay, so what about the 3%? Okay, that disagree about global warming? Well, when you look into it, the 3% tend to be experts, but oftentimes not in climate science. And this is what I've seen a number of times. So you'll have somebody putting articles in a professional magazine that they're very, very good at, and they know really their topics well, but it's not a climate magazine. And then they'll put in an article on climate, well, even though it's not a climate magazine, and therefore they really can't get the reviewers that you could get in some of the better, more appropriate magazines. And so they claim that climate, global warming is not happening. And if you look carefully about their work, it really misses a lot of facts. So somebody did a look at the 3%, and most of their work wasn't very good. And it was in journals that can't attract the right reviewers. It was a lot of, sort of rookie mistakes that they made and so on. Next. Okay, so yeah, again, this is sort of out of order, but I guess it's one of the most important things that I could probably discuss. And balance of facts. You could find a fact to support anything you want, anything you want at all. You know, to give you an example, a cousin of mine said, well, listen, let's talk about global warming, let's talk about wind turbines. And he says, this can't be very good because you cannot recycle wind turbines. And so what do you do with that? Doesn't that affect global warming? Well, he was partially right. At the moment, at least, we can't recycle the turbines because they're made out of fiberglass, but you still recycle the rest of the metal. Even admitting he is right on that one point, what about all of the other facts that you need to look at, besides that one fact that tell you about global warming? To give you another example, I have proven that the Earth is flat. No, I really have. And the way I did it was, I put a stake in the ground with a pointer on top. I got my iPhone and I moved back. I checked. I did this along the railroad tracks. So there weren't any undulations, and I determined what the height was above that point. And I moved back and back, and I kept doing it. And within the data, I don't know, maybe I went 100 feet. I can't remember. And you look at that plot of the data, it was dead flat. And so ergo, the Earth is flat, and I bet I could probably get that published. Maybe not the best journal, but I could probably get it published. But what it does, and I make that as a point, well, what about all the other facts? In spite of it, there are people that believe that the Earth is flat, but in spite of that, you know, well, I mean, we knew since the ancient Greeks that the Earth was round. They knew it because they saw a ship coming towards them, and they saw the mast, you know, rising, and only a globe can actually do that. So, nope. So please understand that you could find facts about anything, but it's the balance of facts that really that really mean everything. And next. Okay, so looking at this for a long time, I really come to, I think this says it all. You know, I'm a technical guy, so I love my plots. I'll try not to bore you with too many of them, but I think these two plots are what really terrify me. So this is CO2 plotted 800,000 years ago to the present on one axis, and the temperature change along those axes. And you can see that the temperature and CO2 go in lockstep. Okay, CO2 changes, the temperature changes, and that goes back 800,000 years. Now, so we didn't have any SUVs or coal-fired power plants 800,000 years ago, but as Lynn pointed out, we did have volcanoes and other things spewing CO2 into the air. And so there's no, and this is just one plot. You know, the theory behind it and so on is well established that you increase CO2, your temperature is going to go up. I mean, again, we've known that since the 80s and 50s. And then if you look at this plot, this is the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, and this goes back 800,000 years ago. And you can see that it bounces around quite a bit, but it always stays below 300 parts per million until soon after the Industrial Revolution. It makes a huge, huge jump, and now we're above 400 parts per million and climbing.
How do we know what was the CO2 in the atmosphere 800,000 years ago?
Oh, you're my straight man, woman. This is great. There are actually quite a few ways, but the most important way is by drilling ice cores. And there are certain places where the snow never melts, and so, until maybe recently, and so it keeps compacting and for millions of years. And so and there are air bubbles that also are created that don't dissipate. And so in those air bubbles, they have what the atmosphere was back then. And they also, by radiocarbon dating, you could also determine how long ago it was. And so if you dig an ice core, you go down, I don't know how far they go anymore, I forget, a few hundred feet, you're looking about 100,000 years ago. And you can pull out that information. So that's how we know 800,000 years ago what the climate was.
Yep.
But an excellent question, Lynn.
Well, I mean, you mentioned ice, and I mean, I don't really understand the facts that well, but my understanding is we've had several periods of worldwide glaciation.
Sure.
Where we've had glaciers grow and then retreat. And I think it's happened 3 or 4 times. I forgot what the number is. But I assume that some of that has happened and is reflected in your temperature graphs that are there.
Some of it, but not all of it. So, and an excellent question. If you go back past 800,000 years, okay, so maybe where I'm standing here, okay, other things were occurring. And a big thing was occurring was the tilt of the Earth. And so we also became much colder in spite of the CO2 levels because the Earth and the sun output was changing. However, when you go back 800,000 years ago, then it's almost exclusively as a result of the CO2. In fact, the numbers elude me at the moment, but so for instance, the sun output, I forget, maybe the last several hundred years, I forget, I could look it up, I just forget exactly. But the sun's output has not changed. In fact, it's gone down a little. It certainly hasn't gone up. So it's almost, and I'll talk a little more about that in a few slides. So it's almost exclusively due to the CO2.
So you think there's a cause and effect relationship between the CO2 that you've got measured there and the temperature?
Oh, I don't think, I'm sure of it.
Well, I understand, but that's what I'm postulating, is that your hypothesis there is that it's the CO2 in the atmosphere that is causing the fluctuation in temperature.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's not to say there aren't other effects, but the major effects is the CO2, which is changing the temperature. Now, you might ask, okay, well, how do I know the temperature is not changing the CO2? Okay, what causes which? Well, there's large amounts of evidence, both experimental and theoretical, that the CO2, in fact, is what, and I'll talk a little more about that later, that it's the CO2 that's changing the temperature. But I'm not sure if I answered your question. I'm just...
No, you haven't, but that's okay, go ahead.
No, let's try again.
No, I think we should go ahead because there are so many other factors that could be involved in that. And my understanding, having talked to people who study glaciers, is that they don't know why they expand and retreat, and they don't know what that relationship is. And if they don't know, then I don't understand what your CO2 theory has to do with it. I can understand that the CO2 may have varied in there, but my guess is that if you look at the glacial periods, they don't line up with your temperature and CO2 graph.
And then something that some of you probably can't see very well back in the room, but I can see it on the screen, is that there are a number of times when the CO2 is significantly higher than the temperature. Like around 50,000 in that range, 40 beyond. See that?
Here?
Yeah. So to Annabelle's perspective, point earlier that sometimes the link isn't obvious for temperatures rising. It sometimes is, temperatures are, that could be where a glacial period was.
Yeah, I think these are all good points. And
Just don't know.
yeah, but again, it's really there are always anomalies in the data. There is always scatter in the data. That's just the nature of the way we live. But I think it's fairly clear that sure you've got anomalies like this, but when you look at the overall data, I just don't see how you can argue that temperature and CO2 go in lockstep.
You have a question?
Well, one thing that this makes me think of, if you were to look at both of these lines, if you were to look at both pieces of data, the CO2 and the temperature, completely separated, you can see how the trends for both match so closely. So I think that's significant. But the other thing is too, where the areas of the lines don't fully match up and whatnot, I think isn't necessarily an issue, because if you think about it, if CO2 is driving a temperature change, that temperature change would then drive changes in everything across the globe in terms of you'd have salinity changes in the oceans, there would be so many other changes that would take place. So it's almost like the CO2 changes the temperature, but you would not expect them to change at the exact same rate at all times, because as it changes what's happening on the globe and other aspects, that is going to affect temperature as well.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And also, don't forget, there's a significant inertia in the changes. So you could make a change in CO2. It'll take a while to see a change in the temperature, which brings me, unfortunately, to the next plot here, which is the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. As I was pointing out, that we've got this peak here that's gone way above anything here that we've ever seen in the past 800,000 years. So you might ask, okay, where's the temperature? Okay, if we're going in lockstep here, and we've gone beyond anything seen here, why hasn't the temperature gone up equally? And the reason is because of the thermal inertia of the planet, that it just takes a lot of time for the temperature to catch up. But catch up it will. Next.
Well, also,
Yeah.
we see lots of weather anomalies as that occurs too. So you get more of these hurricanes and all the things those cause. You get more droughts where people have to migrate out of areas because they can't get water to raise crops and all that.
Oh, yeah,
So
well, true. Yeah, there's a lot of interactions.
And again, my job is a skeptic. So, you mentioned droughts. I mean, this is something that I dealt with professionally a lot. And the thing of it is, weather patterns, periods of time, there have been, we talk about record droughts. It's because our records are so sparse and limited. We know a lot about what's happened in the last 50 years. We know a little bit about what's happened in the last 200 years. We don't know an awful lot about what the temperatures actually were 500 years ago. And we certainly don't know what the rainfall patterns were, even 1,000 years ago. And that's part of the problem. When we talk about our records are fairly small, and we use statistical inferences to kind of fill in the gaps. But we don't really know how often we have periods of drought, and we don't know how that's connected necessarily to the issues of global warming.
now, are they doing? You mentioned core samples in icebergs and that type of thing. Are they doing core samples geologically in the ground? Will that tell us anything?
I think they do, but I wasn't referring to that because I think the information coming from the ice is far, far better. Just because of the nature of how static it has been over the past hundreds of thousands of years.
So,
Well,
any other comments?
yeah, I agree with you. I think the issues are very, very complex and, sort of like you catch the flu. Well, it doesn't affect just one part of you, it affects all your organs. And that's why you sneeze and cough and have a fever and lose your appetite and so on. So this is, it's a very complex issue. And looking at, from a 40,000 foot level, I think we could see that it's happening because CO2 is increasing, energies are increasing, and temperatures are going up. So that was sort of my introduction to my talk. So I'm going to talk about what, nope,
No.
back.
I'm trying to rush them along.
Can't go to work. So talking about what global warming is, and if we have time, which we may not, is what it causes. Next. Okay, so now for a quiz, clear your desks. Take out a number 2 pencil. Cheating is okay. It's the times we live in. Next. Okay, so put in order of these people and things that create the most greenhouse gases. So what we have is a professor, a cow, a Chinese citizen, a student, college student, a family from Africa, and a cowboy. So of these, who is the most, putting out the most CO2?
Cows.
Well, that's methane.
No, yeah, my mistake. Greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
Yes. Cows burp out a lot of methane, but they're not the worst one. They're pretty bad, but they're not the worst one. Maybe they're 2 or 3.
Must be college.
I think the college student, because they're using so much technology that requires.
Well, the college student, not all college students, but typically college students tend to be a bit on the poor side. I certainly was. So they're not driving cars and flying here and there. So not only as a college student, anyone else? That sort of relates 2 for number 1.
That would suggest the professor,
Yeah, and why?
because she's probably wealthy.
Yep.
Probably takes airplanes a lot.
Right?
Probably drives around and creates greenhouse gas emissions from their cars and so forth.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think, if you look at a person's carbon footprint, the best indicator is wealth. And so typically, not all professors are wealthy, but just as a stereotype, professionals, college professors and so on are probably the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases. A very close friend of mine is a professor at University of California at Irvine, and he's into sustainability and all of that. He's got, I don't know, 5,000 square foot house, just him and his wife now. He drives a Porsche. So, okay, yeah. So, and now my poor college student, she probably doesn't do a lot of greenhouse gases now, but she will once she becomes a professional. I would say the cow is maybe number 2 or so. How about my Chinese friend?
On a per capita basis, much less.
Right, on per capita basis.
Is he rural or urban?
He looks rural to me, but quite good point. But per capita basis, an individual not so much. But because there are so many of them, on a country basis, China puts out more greenhouse gases than any other country. They've surpassed the U.S. We used to be pretty good at it. They surpassed us.
What about India?
India is probably third. I think I have a plot on that somewhere, but they're probably second or third. And partly because China and India, they have a lot of coal-fired power plants, so they're putting out a lot of CO2. Obviously, the poor African family don't do much, and the most innocent of all is my cowboy friend who goes back to the 1800s. So we really weren't doing much there. Next. Okay, are electric vehicles clean? Are they pollution-free?
No.
A lot of no's. Why?
Because you need the electricity for it to charge it up, and it could come from coal fire.
Exactly.
What about producing them?
Yes.
And they have batteries that
Yes.
cause problems.
Yeah, so there are a lot of rare earth elements that go into the batteries, and it's pretty energy intensive to pull those out. And of course, as you pointed out, you got to charge the batteries. So the thing about electric vehicles is they could be nearly emission-free if we decarbonize all of our electric utilities, which is one of the 2 keys that I view for global warming issues is decarbonizing our electric utilities and carbon capture. I think those are 2 very important ones.
But right now, they make people feel good.
Yeah, well, that's true. And some of them are really quite beautiful. Okay, so as I said, we need to decarbonize and we need to stop fossil fueling and have renewables and nuclear. Next. Okay, so this is an LED lamp. Does it help? Yeah. It does, but not in the way you think. Okay, clearly it uses less electricity than an incandescent or even a fluorescent, so that helps that way. But there's another way, and can you go back 1 slide?
Oh, I don't think so.
All right, never mind, don't worry about it. Okay, if we decarbonize our electric utilities, down, next. Okay, then does it really matter, okay, how much electricity we're burning if this bulb is not producing any CO2 because all the electric utilities are either not fossil fired, are nuclear or renewables? So, but it helps in 2 ways. The first is we are using fossil fuels, so this reduces what we're currently doing. But the other thing it does, if we do decarbonize all of our electric utilities, this and similar types of technologies then reduce the size of the plant that's required. And that's crucially important because, installing nuclear power plants, installing renewable energies is very, very expensive. And the more you can reduce what's needed, the more likely we will be successful. Next. Okay, this is a 3-part question. The third part is extra credit. I don't think anybody's going to get the third one, but what is it? What does it do?
A nuclear plant
You got a nuclear power plant, what else? What does it do?
produces energy.
It produces electricity. Yes, this is a power plant. So is this a fossil fire plant or a nuclear plant?
Nuclear.
It would be fossil because it has a stack.
Very good. Very good.
Oh.
Yeah, these hyperbolic cooling towers, nuclear have them, but so do fossil fire plants, but this stack is a giveaway. Okay, so is this, now for the extra credit, I don't think anybody's gonna get this. Is it natural gas fired or coal fired?
I don't see a coal pile.
Okay,
There could be one,
Gas
off
tanks,
to the
that-
left.
It's like gas, say gas tanks.
There's a chute going into the building.
Right.
you see this? Absolutely, this guy's good. You're gonna get an A in this course. This is a conveyor belt, so the coal pile is here, and so you wouldn't see this if it was a natural gas plant. Next, have humans ever gone extinct?
Which humans?
Us.
No,
Some of
you're
those
right,
were-
there have
Well,
been.
some of the early hominids have. Sure.
Yeah.
No, we're still here. However, about depending on which research paper you look at, about 70,000 years ago, there was a bottleneck. We almost went extinct, and it came down to about 40 breeding humans that were left, that were responsible for the billions of people we have now. And it's a good thing they were very fond
So
of.
find that on your ancestry.
Yeah, right. But my point here is we almost went extinct before. We could go again in the future. Next. Are there aliens out there? This is a matter of opinion, not a matter of fact, but I want to make a point. Are there aliens on this? I mean, technologically advanced aliens. Any thoughts? Well, we haven't found any, right? SETI's been looking for, 50 years, and there have been no signals. There are a lot of reasons for it, but the thing that concerns me the most is that advanced technologies, they may advance to a point where they just hit a roadblock and they can't get past it. And so you hit these catastrophes, and maybe that's why we haven't, I think there are a lot of reasons why we haven't seen aliens made of big streets, because the universe is so vast, and it takes time for signals to get here. But it could be that they hit a roadblock, and one of those roadblocks could be climate change, global warming. Next. How well does Easton, Maryland do in combating global warming? Next. The median household income is Easton's a very wealthy area. That's clearly obvious. And as we pointed out before, wealth is probably the best indicator of a personal carbon footprint. So Easton, Maryland probably does its share in producing CO2 directly or indirectly. Next. The U.S. average is about 60,000. Next. Yeah, next. Okay, so why should storms and rising sea levels worry residents of Easton?
Because we're so low.
Very little,
Because I think the elevation is around 23 feet. Next. So you could see property damage, but there's another thing, far more subtle problem with this. Next. Insurance companies, they don't like paying out claims. And so they're moving away from a lot of the risk that's associated with global warming type of
Well, that's
activities.
just about all over the country now.
Yep.
If it's not fire, it's storm damage or it's flooding.
Yep, absolutely.
So
So,
insurance companies.
if you, I wouldn't buy property in Florida Keys right now. And don't expect to get much insurance if you do. Next. Okay, so the Baltimore, this is interesting. Baltimore 100-year floods usually happen in every 100 years because that's why they're called 100-year floods. Well, they've been happening like every 30 years. So global warming has a way of statistics.
See, I think this is part of the issue. What is a 100-year flood or a 50-year flood or a 1,000-year flood is based on a statistical model
Yep,
that the Corps of Engineers uses.
yep.
That statistical model is somebody is trying to fit a curve to the data points that we have. We don't have that many data points.
Absolutely correct. But let me also state that you're correct. This is the best information that we had. Could it be wrong? Yes. But the fact that there is considerable uncertainty in this data doesn't mean it's wrong, and doesn't mean that it then says, okay, your global warming issues are nonsense. All this means is this is the best we know. It's uncertain, certainly. Nothing in life is certain. It's certainly uncertain. I guess that's a certainty. But it's what we know right now. Next. All right, so this is sea level change. Let's see, maybe we should move through this a little quicker. Next. Okay, no, I don't think I want this one. Next. All right, so you get an A+ for effort. Next. Okay, so now let's talk about how the Earth heats up. And there are only three components that affect the Earth's energy balance and therefore temperature. The first is the sun, of course. Without the sun, we'd be a pretty cold place. So the sun is what heats up the Earth. But then the Earth does two things. One is it reflects some of that solar energy. Ice and snow, for instance, is an excellent reflector of throwing energy back into space. But then because of the Earth's temperature, it also radiates its own energy. Everything radiates energy. You think of a fireplace. Okay, fireplace, you don't need to touch a fireplace to feel the heat. The closer you get to it, the hotter it is. Well, we're also no different. People, we emanate heat. Anything that has temperature, which is everything in the universe, gives off heat. So when you look at the balance, the radiation coming in minus the two radiation components going out, is all that affects the energy balance of the major, what's the major components that affect the energy balance of our planet and therefore our temperature. Yeah, there are other things. You've got radioactive materials in the Earth that are giving off heat and so on, but they're very, very small compared to this balance. Next. So, as long as the energy is in balance, then the temperature stays the same. You can't draw any other conclusion, right? You keep the thermostat fixed, the temperature doesn't change. Next. But if the energy going out decreases, then the temperature has to go up. It's like pushing your thermostat out. Okay, so if we do anything to reduce the energy going out, then the temperature is going to go up. Next. And unfortunately, the CO2 molecule is perfect for that. It's like a one-way valve. As Ms. Foote discovered back in 1850, it vibrates. It's got a carbon atom in the middle and two oxygen atoms at the sides, and it vibrates. And if, sort of like Raman spectroscopy.
Infrared vibrations.
Yes. And if you hit it with a photon of just the right wavelength, it'll vibrate, it'll absorb that wavelength. Now, it'll also re-emit it, and maybe a nitrogen atom will pick it up or something like that, but it will get hit with the right wavelength and it'll vibrate and absorb that. Other wavelengths will pass right through it. Next. Go to the next one. I want to get to a certain. I'll come back to these. Next. I want to come back to these. I don't see it. Next. All right, let's go back up. I'll have to come back to it. But the point I wanted to make, go back to that CO2. Yeah, this is good. If you look at the wavelength of the Earth, its radiation, because it's a lower temperature, it's a longer wavelength compared to the sun's radiation. So the Earth is radiating at about 15 or so microns. The sun is radiating, it's a spectrum, but the peak is the sun is about a half a micron. And the CO2 molecule is very, very good at absorbing the 15 micron radiation, and the half a micron goes right through it without even saying a whole lot. It just goes right through it. So the CO2 molecule acts as a one-way valve. And so you can see in this cartoon is what's happening next. And so this is the way a greenhouse works. It's not CO2 in here, it's glass, but it's the same idea. So the sun's coming in at a half a micron, which goes through the glass, but then what's in there is radiating at a longer wavelength, and it can't get through the glass because the glass is blocking some of it. And so you have an energy imbalance in your greenhouse, and that's why greenhouses are so warm. Same thing with your car. We've seen this a lot lately, haven't we? You leave your car windows rolled up, you get in, and it's really hot. Well, why is it really hot? Because the half a micron from the sun pretty much gets through the glass, but then after it's absorbed, and it re-radiates out at a longer wavelength. And why is it a longer wavelength? Because this is not the sun. It's radiating out at a much lower temperature, and so the glass blocks some of that. Next. Okay, anybody tell me what this is?
It's like a volcano.
Yeah, it's, I didn't take this photo. It's Venus. And Venus, most of the atmosphere in Venus is CO2. So in Venus, you've got a runaway CO2 effect. And so on Venus, you can actually melt lead on the surface. So let's hope that we don't go that far. But there's cosmological proof in our solar system. Next. Yeah, as we discussed before, once you create a molecule of CO2, it lasts forever because whatever sinks we have that are absorbing CO2, they're all taken up with the natural occurring CO2 that we're producing, even though it may be getting worse because of deforestation. So anything new that we put in the air stays there forever. Now, if you were to paint an individual CO2 molecule, you paint it red, it may get absorbed. But if it gets absorbed, then that's one less CO2 molecule that can get absorbed again. And so it's not, I'm not saying every individual CO2 molecule will stay here, but on the average and the total number of CO2 molecules, the more we put in, the higher it gets, and it's a problem of accumulation. And it doesn't change. It doesn't change unless we remove CO2. And we're going to, and that's why climate change or whatever is a class of problems much different than what we're used to. We're used to problems of proportion. And so by that I mean, you go to the doctors and he says, hey, look, you got to drop 10 pounds, 15 pounds. And so we do, we drop the weight, and what happens? Well, our cholesterol comes down, our blood pressure, our joints start to feel better, because proportionally, we improved ourselves. CO2 is not a problem of proportion. So whatever we're putting in the air now, if we cut the CO2 in half, the global warming problem does not get cut in half. It continues unabated. We buy time. It takes longer for it to happen, but it's a problem of accumulation. So certainly we need to reduce all of our greenhouse gases, but if we get to a point by 2050, for instance, and we're above the number of atmospheric CO2, then we're going to go to 200, we're going to go to 2 degrees centigrade increase. If we decrease our CO2, maybe it won't be 2050, it might be 2075, but the problem is there nonetheless. We're still going to drive off the cliff, but it's just going to take longer. So that's why it's a problem of accumulation, so we're not really used to it.
So during COVID,
Yeah,
all of a sudden we weren't flying,
yes,
we weren't driving,
yes,
and there was a big change.
right.
What was that big change?
Yeah, the CO2, I know in this country, our CO2 emissions went down. It was also partly because, industry took a big hit. And so we weren't getting all of the industrial CO2 emissions. And again, yeah, people, I didn't even go to a restaurant. I didn't go anywhere.
It seemed quick.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, you could, yeah, but then look what happened to our economy. I mean, so, you could take significant steps to reduce CO2 if we had the will. Okay, now, what did that do for us? I mean, now we're back to producing it. It really helped, but it didn't solve the problem because it's a problem of accumulation, because CO2 just lasts forever. Next. All right, so now go to the next one. Let's see, where are we? What is this at? Over 230? Okay, now so this is Maryland. So Maryland has half of their energies coming from nuclear and from renewable, which is a really, really good thing. But, 14% is still coming from coal. And it's, that really needs to change. I mean, we need to go to 100% from nuclear or renewables, or whatever fossil fuels we put in the air need to be removed by carbon capture. Yeah.
Do you have any idea what the percentage of difference would be if you were to compare a given amount of, let's say, however much coal it takes to power something, say a generator for 1 hour, compared to the equivalent amount of gasoline that it would take to power that same device for the same amount of time? Which one proportionally puts out more
I don't know about gasoline, but I could compare it to natural gas. Okay, so coal puts out twice as much CO2 for the same energy content, for the same output. It produces twice as much CO2 as does natural gas. And the reason is that as I said, hydrogen and carbon are both what create the energy. Hydrogen creates more energy than does carbon. So, methane is CH4, so it's got one carbon and four hydrogen atoms. Coal has fewer. And so because there's more carbon in the coal, it normally produces more CO2, but also because it has less energy, pound for pound of natural gas. You have to burn more coal to get the same energy as natural gas. And so you come by a factor of 2. So that's why, now, coal in this country has been declining rapidly. 10, 20 years ago, we made up 50% or more our electric utility. Now, I think it's below 20%. Has nothing to do with regulations or climate change. It's just that natural gas prices have been so, it's in the history, certainly in the last 30 years that I've been watching it, natural gas prices have never been this low in the past 10 years compared to coal. And so it's now cheaper to burn natural gas and to convert coal-fired power plants to natural gas than to run coal ones. Part of that is because of fracking, because fracking now is producing copious amounts of natural gas, so the price has gone down. Next. Yeah, so most of our greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide by far. Methane, nitrous oxide, fluorinated gases, far worse greenhouse gases than CO2. Far, far worse. But because we have more CO2 in the air, and because the CO2 never disappears, well, these oftentimes do, these will disappear. CO2 is sort of the redheaded stepchild of gases. So it's not the most lethal in terms of global warming gas, but because there's so much of it and it lasts so long, it's a real important one. So talking about cows, burping cows, and then methane leaks all the natural gas pipes that we have. There are leaks. So we do make about 10% of that, which is kind of interesting because it suggests some strategies here. Clearly, you want to reduce CO2. There's no question about that. But because methane is a far more serious greenhouse gas, and it's easier, technologically speaking, to address. What do you have to do with methane? How do you stop methane? Anyone?
Kill the cows.
Eat more fish. Eat more vegetables. Eat less cows. And also, we're talking about leaks. There's no technological hurdle to stop a methane leak. It takes money. It might take a lot of money, certainly. If you put a carbon tax on, I don't know how that would work with methane, but yeah, if you put a carbon tax on methane, then it becomes more valuable to stop the leak. So technologically speaking, and because methane is a much more serious gas than carbon dioxide, it might be easy to attack. But
So where's the leak coming from? The leaks.
Well, from pipes, from the transportation of natural gas. And of course, you're flaring. Some places flare natural gas as well. But nonetheless, that doesn't drive away the point that carbon dioxide is still the king, and that has to be addressed. But methane is much easier to address in the short term.
Does methane come from gas fireplaces and gas stoves? Okay.
Well, sure. If absolutely. If you have incomplete combustion of a gas stove or anything, a furnace, a big industrial furnace, first of all, you'll produce soot. You produce carbon. You'll also produce carbon monoxide. But one of the worst things, if you don't tune your burners, then you'll get raw gas, raw methane coming out. And same thing with your car. If you see blue smoke, you don't see that anymore because cars have gotten pretty sophisticated. But if you see blue smoke coming out of your tailpipe, then you're pouring just raw gasoline into the air. But that's not difficult to fix. I've been in plants where they've had that problem.
I'm
And
talking about houses. We've all got gas fireplaces and gas stoves.
you got, if they're properly tuned, you should not see any methane leaks. If they're not, then you can. But even with that, it's still coming mostly from transportation and from cows. But it's a very good point. Next. Next. Okay, I want to make a point on this one that I don't think I've made yet, but, so 30 billion tons of CO2 or 84% is related to human activity. I think we talked about this before, the balance is from natural processes. But the thing that I really want to talk about is here, because we haven't talked about the oceans yet. And the oceans have saved us more than you can ever imagine. The oceans have absorbed 80 to 90% of the CO2, and they've taken over 90% of the excess energy that is hit on Earth. So first, let's talk about the excess energy. Anybody know why the oceans have absorbed? I mean, that's a huge number, right? 90%, over 90%. Any idea why the oceans have done that? I mean, the first thing is the oceans cover almost three quarters of the planet. So on an area basis, they're certainly going to absorb more. The other reason is that their specific heat is much more effective at absorbing water. You know, it's easier to heat up a pot of water than it is to heat up a pot of sand. But the other reason also is that the oceans are very poor reflectors. Ice and snow are great at reflecting energy, but the oceans reflect very, very poorly. Even dirt is a better reflector of the energy. And so the oceans are very, very good at containing their heat. Now, there are two problems with that. The first problem is it ain't going to last forever. So as the oceans heat up, and there's a lot of thermal inertia, they're going to give up some of their energy, some of their heat. And, and it may take 40 years or so. So that's why if we were to stop all greenhouse gas emissions immediately today, as impossible as that is, we're still going to have 40 years of temperature increases because you've got the oceans still ready to give up their heat.
But we also have the oceans absorbing that temperature and killing off a lot of life in the oceans.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, you've got the temperature, and you also have the acidification because the oceans are absorbing all the CO2. And so, I mean, you've heard about, corals disappearing. Well, a lot of the animals at the bottom of the food chain are disappearing as well because of this. But the other problem too is it ain't going to last because there are only so many houses at the end, only so many rooms at the end. So oceans absorb CO2 much differently than the air. The air, it's a CO2 molecule along with all the other molecules, and there's almost an unlimited capacity for CO2. The oceans are not like that because the oceans dissolve the CO2, and at some point you get to where the oceans become saturated, and while they may be absorbing 80 or 90% of the CO2, at some point that's just going to stop. It can't do it anymore. And then all of that CO2 then goes into the air, which would be much worse than it is now. Next. Okay, and now for some proof. Okay, I got time for proof. Okay, so if you were an astronaut looking down at the Earth, and if you had magic eyes, and you could see not just the visible spectrum, but all of the radiation as colors, and if you could move back and forth in time, this is what it would look like right around or before the Industrial Revolution. And what you're seeing is, this is the wavelength in microns, and you're seeing all of the radiation going out. Now, next, fast forward a few hundred years. Next. Okay, now what we're seeing is around 15 microns, there's a black spot. There's less radiation leaving the Earth at 15 microns. The rest are more or less, actually there's a water one as well, which I'll show you, but at 15 microns, which is exactly where CO2 emits. Next. Okay, so that cartoon comes from this plot. So this is a NASA plot, and this is from their Nimbus 4 satellite. And what they were looking at was, I think this was over Africa, doesn't matter where along the Earth, and they were looking at the radiation coming out. And what you should see is a smooth curve, but you got two dips. And this dip, here's the wavelength, this is what I showed you in the cartoon, is around 15 microns. And you can see there's a very significant reduction in the energy leaving the Earth at 15 microns, which is exactly where CO2 absorbs. And so if there's a reduction in the energy leaving the Earth, well, Earth's going to heat up, right? It's got no other place to go. If you reduce the energy going, leaving, and you don't change the energy coming in, and the sun has been more or less constant, past 100 years, certainly, past few hundred years, this is what happens. So this is the smoking gun, if not the bullet itself. And I love this plot because it just shows it so clearly. This is water vapor, by the way. But that's a whole nother story. Water vapor is more of the victim than the aggressor here because of CO2, we're producing more water vapor. So if you didn't have CO2 in the first place, you wouldn't have this here as well.
Is this chart one point in time?
I don't know, but I'm willing to bet it's probably accumulated.
And then they're averaging it?
Yeah, because that's just the way spectroscopy works, but I'm not sure. I could look it up if you'd like, and I can find out. Okay, next.
Can I ask a question before you move from that chart?
Yeah.
You talked about wavelengths in there, but is the wavelength in any way indicative of the quantity of energy?
No, not by itself, no. What's indicative of the quantity of energy would be the amount of CO2 in the air. So, like if you have one CO2 molecule, I mean, it's going to have the same effect in terms of the radiation effect, but, this is energy. I mean, this is the energy leaving the planet. And this happens to be, let me see if I can understand your question. This happens to be, I forget what it was back then, but maybe 350 parts per million CO2 in the air. So the more CO2 you have in the air, the deeper you're going to see this curve go down.
But you're saying the quantity of energy at these other wavelengths, it is what it is, but the fact that you have a smaller quantity of energy at a specific set of wavelengths, how is that indicative of the total quantity of energy?
Ah, excellent question. Excellent question. This plot doesn't show that. All this plot is showing is that, we've gone from, we've had whatever the number is, about a 60% reduction in the energy leaving at 15 microns. Okay, but that raises a very good point. It doesn't say, okay, what about the entire energy leaving the planet? Has that gone down by 60%? The answer is no, it hasn't. It's been less than that, much, much less than that. Actually, go to the next plot. Now, I'm going to address that with the problem that I had with this plot. But nonetheless, this is a black body radiation, and this shows the Earth, because of its lower temperature than the sun, it's number one, emits at 15 microns, and the sun is emitting at a half a micron. Now, what this says, and this is where I start to have a problem, and it goes along with what you're saying, is that this is reduced by a factor of 1,000,000, so it fits on the same plot. So what this is saying is that the sun, because of its much higher temperature, emits a factor of 1,000,000, the scale is removed, but higher than the Earth. Okay, the reason why I have a problem with that is, and then I'll fix it in my next presentation, is because if that were true, it is true, but if all of that energy was hitting the Earth, then we would just be a cinder. We would not be having this conversation. Okay. The sun does emit millions of times more than the Earth, so why are we not a cinder? Okay, where's all that energy going? Any idea? More of a technical question, but...
Well, it goes out into space.
Yeah.
There's only, if the sun is radiating everywhere,
Perfect.
there's only one little dot.
Perfect.
Something.
Perfect, absolutely. It's the view factor. So if this is the sun, and this is tiny little Earth, only a small amount of that energy gets into here. Whereas the Earth itself, it's just the opposite. All of that energy is emitting into space. So the Earth has a view factor of 1, and the view factor of the Sun to the Earth is much, much lower. And that's why this is really a problem. And then on top of that, in addition to the emissions, you've got the radiation that's leaving the Earth. So if the temperatures were fixed, then this would equal this plus the reflection. And that's what the direction, and that difference now is not that great, but there is a difference, a significant difference. And so this is a bit misleading. Next. Well, I think we already talked about this. Next. So this is more, it's really zoomed in. So this is going from 1880 to 2020, and you can see the temperature increase and the CO2 again going in lockstep. Next. And this is from 64 to 2008. Get zooming in. Nope, go back. Again, zooming in, you can see that there's a clear trend. Next. And this is the plot I showed you earlier. It's one of the ones that terrify me because of the speed of change. Okay, because the CO2 not only is greater than it ever has been for 800,000 years, but the rapid rise is unprecedented in what we know in what's going on in the Earth. So it's not just the increase, which is serious enough. Yes.
This is, when I looked at this before, I had the same question, thinking, you see these peaks in history, and they zoom up very quickly, and then it gradually goes down. What is that? We're talking about ice ages. Is that ice ages or?
No, it would be just the opposite. They would result in either an ice age forming or disappearing. This is CO2. This is nothing more than CO2 in the atmosphere, and it could be to two events. One is volcanic action, which was much greater in the past, and it could be just there's more CO2 being released by vegetation decaying than new vegetation can absorb, and that's why you're seeing this up and down motion. And if it wasn't for us, you continue to see it, see this dolphin effect. But we have this spike. The problem with the speed of the spike is that, never mind the magnitude of it, which is bad enough, but the speed of it is that we being us and animals and plants, we cannot adapt fast enough. So, as things get warmer, animals can move north, trees can move north. I mean, they can't walk, but their acorns fall, and then the ones that survive are further north, and so on and so forth. But they can't move this fast. Nothing can move this fast. And so eventually the temperature is going to catch up to the CO2 level, and it's, we just can't adapt fast enough. It's just not going to happen. We're just not capable of it. Now, technologies are wonderful. I mean, they got us into this problem in the first place, of course, but to me, it seems, it's kind of a conundrum, really. Okay, do we push technologies as hard as we can, like carbon capture and so on? There's something which I'll talk about next week. There's geoengineering, where you can actually block radiation from the sun coming down. It's easy to do. Volcanoes have been doing it for millennia. And it's technologically feasible, never mind the cost. But the unintended, it solves nothing, it just buys us time. But the unintended consequences can be very significant. So there's lots of things we can do, but we don't have a lot of time left to do this. And it's going to, right now, global warming is clearly outrunning us. Yeah.
I keep wondering, I guess I didn't take enough chemistry. I do know certain molecules can be broken down or combined with other things. Don't we have some way to break down a carbon dioxide molecule? The oxygen is just in the air and a pile of black carbon on the ground.
Well, yeah, and that's part of the reason how CO2 capture works, or one of the ways it works. So you can capture CO2, you can then split up the carbon from the oxygen, and then you could use the carbon for fuel and, use the oxygen for something else, or you could just bury the CO2 and let it turn into a lime or whatever it wants to do. So yeah, there are ways of doing it, but you got to capture the CO2 to do that in the first place. I mean, if you're thinking about, okay, could we spray something in the air to then combine with CO2? Yeah, I suppose that's possible, but the difficulties, the technical cost difficulties and the unintended consequences would be huge. Because also chemical reactions are temperature dependent. And if it's not exothermic, like you combine oxygen with methane or coal, it's exothermic. You don't have to do anything, just spark it. And then it'll be self-propelling. It'll continue to burn. But when you have something that's endothermic, it requires energy. And so it's easy. So you take a carbon molecule and an oxygen molecule and put them together, you get energy without doing anything. But the reverse is true. If you want to split a carbon from an oxygen molecule, it takes energy to do that. And so where do you get the energy from? Well, you gotta burn some solar, maybe, or nuclear. Yeah, okay, next. Yeah, the military is very, very, very concerned about global warming, and they've already seen the effects of it. First of all, you've got their military bases, or their naval bases. They've taken enormous damage already with storms and sea level rises and so on. And so you've got that's on their radar. You have the fact that global warming is very politically destabilizing. It leads to violence. And now, I always say we're the 700-pound gorilla. We're no longer the 800-pound gorilla because China is probably at 600 pounds and getting fatter. But we're still very, very much affected strategically by anything that goes on in the world. And the number of conflicts have been projected to increase significantly as temperatures rise. And so many of those conflicts will directly affect us. And so our military has to address those. And then thirdly, you've got humanitarian. The U.S. military is the biggest humanitarian provider in the world. I don't know how long they're going to be able to continue to do that, but as flooding and heat waves and things keep occurring, they're going to have a difficult time. And it's a zero-sum game. You only have so much money. Now, you can increase the military's budget, but if you're taking money to do all of these things, well, then the money's no longer where it used to be. So next. Next.
And this is the next one.
Yeah, do it again. I think there's something else here. Well, okay. So the National Authority, this is just one quote. I've got hundreds of them. So the National Defense Authorization Act for 2018 says it is the sense of Congress that climate change is a direct threat to the national security of the United States. It clearly is. Basically, you want to find out how serious this problem is? Look at those that have a dog in the fight. Okay, military definitely has a dog in the fight. Next. I won't belabor it. Insurance industry has much to lose. Well, we talked about, they're pulling out of a lot of places. First of all, insurance rates, even automobile insurance rates are skyrocketing because of this. But you look at billion-dollar disasters, and from 1980 up to 2020, and you can see a ramp. They're good business people. They're going to cut their losses. Next. And that's the third one. So this guy Steyer's commissioned a study, and it says business leaders are not adequately focused on global warming impact on finances. Next. I think Ruben was under the Clinton administration. A lot of really significant, monumental issues facing the economy, but global warming supersedes all else. And these aren't alone. I mean, these are just two quotes that I pulled. I can pull a lot more. Next. Okay, so this sort of gets me into a whole new topic about global warming and some of the other issues besides temperature. Let's see, maybe I summarize. Go to the next one. Yeah. So I don't want to get into this because we only have 4 minutes left, but, because temperatures are rising, why are storms getting bigger, for instance? Well, storms are based on two things, temperature and mass. The temperature drives their energy, and the amount of water vapor drives how big they are. So what's happening? Well, oceans are getting hotter and hotter and hotter, so that the energy that storms can grab from the oceans is getting bigger and bigger. And then as temperatures go up, there's more, the air can hold more water vapor, and so the amount of mass of storms gets larger. So what happens? You get bigger storms and more of them. So, but then you've got, diseases, and you've got weather extremes. Mosquitoes, they love warm, moist weather. And, there's 10 trillion mosquitoes out there, which I have to wonder how people count them, because they only live for 7 days, so I guess you count very quickly. But they love this kind of weather. Mosquitoes historically have killed almost half of humanity. Go back several hundred years. And they're still killing a lot of people now. So they're one of the biggest killers of our species. And they're only going to get worse. In any event, let's see. Maybe you could just go to one of the, keep going down. Or maybe you just go to the, get out of the slide presentation, and I want to go to one of the last slides. And just go down. Down. More. Okay, so actually go to this one. We got a few minutes. I like this one. This one here. And go into slide mode. So one of the problems, 40% of all primates are at risk of extinction. I really haven't gotten into the extinction issue, but we're going through the sixth mass extinction in our planet, and it's going to be a doozy. Next. And can you tell me what these are? These are primates. So 40% can go extinct, so we can as well. Next. So summary. Okay, global warming is real and is clear, and unfortunately all too present danger. Next. We have to understand it and let it become part of our inherent beliefs. We have to pick our leaders. We must decarbonize. And we got to do it all by 2050. You're right. Okay, so when have we ever not faced serious problems as a species? I mean, the Roman Empire, the Pax Romana, about 2,000 years ago, they had, 200 years of war-free time throughout the empire. Apart from that, we've always faced problems. There was the COVID problem, there was the Spanish flu, there's several world wars, many wars. Tidal waves, yeah. So, are we living in an exceptional time? I don't think so. Maybe we don't take any action. The magnitude of the problem will be exceptional. But look, we've been there before. We're going to be there again. And we're there now. And so it's really all about us, the primates, about what we can do about it. And so, we have to start taking action. We will take action, by the way. Make no mistake about that. It's a question of when. Cataclysms are great for taking action. There was that asteroid that hit Jupiter some years ago, and they had a great photograph of what it did to the planet. Right after that, everybody was talking about, asteroid protection from the Earth. Can we, so there's a lot of interest in that. So catastrophes are really great for getting people's attention. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have some, and maybe more than we want. So we will take action. Things will work. The question is, what price are we going to pay? Is it going to work because we're going to have a significant reduction in population? That'll work. We'll stop spewing CO2 gases pretty quickly. Or is it because we actually take action, we remove carbon from the air, we start decarbonizing, and so on? Well, clearly, it's up to us, right? It's up to all of us. what actions we want to take and how fast we want to take it. So thank you very much for your time. I truly appreciate it. And I'll open the floor to comments or questions.
Very impressive.
Thank you. You know, you just need time.
But the thing is, the thing is, all this new construction is all over the place.
Yeah.
It's putting in everything is bad. Everything is bad. Cement and blacktop and gas fireplaces and gas stoves and gas furnaces. So that's how picture gators.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we need to grow, I suppose. I mean, the population of this country is leveling out. In all, but in third world countries, the population is increasing very rapidly, and they don't want just, they want to have the same standard of living that we have, so that's not going to change. But it's how we go about it. Cement is very, very greenhouse gas intensive, and there really aren't many alternatives, but, yeah.
Are you going to talk next time about the economics of addressing these climate change issues? Because there are obviously some more expensive than others, some more efficacious than others in terms of their overall effect. And that's one of the things that doesn't seem to be part of the public debate. Nobody wants to talk about how much it's going to cost.
Yeah, I mean, I will talk about, and these, understand, are just estimates. I mean, these are broad estimates. These are very, inaccurate estimates about what it will take. But I will talk about overall. I'm not going to talk about a particular specific technology as to what that's going to cost, because that could get into reams of data and turn into a very, very long presentation. But the problem that we face is some technologies work. Okay, electric vehicles work. Okay, and solar is working, and we know that. But other than that, what's the cost of carbon removal? Well, we don't know yet. It could be very significant, because you look at just getting a technology to work, but then scaling it up. Nobody knows.
Well, that's one of the questions I have about the electric grid. I mean, it's one thing to say, well, we know how to generate power using solar and wind, and we know something about how to transmit power. We have this, multi-billion, probably trillion-dollar investment in a grid, and to modify that so that you can get the power where you want it when you need it, and at what cost. And those are huge issues. And if people today thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to do all these things, but the real cost of electricity in the year 2050 is going to be 10 times what it is now. How many people would vote for that?
Well, you're right, and everything you're saying is absolutely true. And there are two parts to what you're saying that I'd like to expand on a bit. The first part is, you've got global warming denial that occurs in two different places. So you've got those that don't believe global warming is going to occur. And then you've got those that believe global warming is going to occur. But, it's just a pittance. You do a technology here, and it's solved. Ain't true. They're both denying in the same, different ways, but they're both in denial. And you're quite right. We are talking about trillions of dollars to solve these problems, but I think you need to compare that to how much money, if we don't solve the problems, what is it going to cost us? And that could be a lot more than the money we're putting in, which is a very difficult argument to make. But when you're saying, okay, electricity, I got my electric bill. I rented a Tesla to see what it's like, and the damn rental company charged me 65 cents a kilowatt hour. I hit the roof when I saw that. But yeah, electric costs go up. Our standard of living will improve because of technological developments on the one hand, but it's also going to go down because either we don't attack global warming because of the money. Well, you can see, we have to put it there. You can see it now. I mean, gasoline prices are going up, insurance prices are going up, food prices are increasing. There are a lot of reasons for it, not just global warming. The wars that are going on and so on. But yes, it's going to be costly. People, that's why I always, we're not coming out of this unscathed. We could stop CO2 emissions today. we're not coming out of it unscathed. There's going to be significant cost. People don't want to know that. They don't want to admit it. They want to, lock it up in their little ivory tower. You're absolutely correct.
I think we should have this course some a little closer to happy hour or something.
Yeah, right. Well, next week I'll talk about solutions.
Yes.
So it can be solved.
I'm trying to equate or get the connection between, you've heard a lot about the ozone layer and the hole over Antarctica. How does that fit with what we're talking about, global warming and CO2?
Well,
Do the two interact together or?
no, I don't think so. Ozone is an interesting problem. It's a different molecule altogether. It's an oxygen molecule, CO2. The interesting thing about the ozone is that we actually made significant progress in solving it. Now, it's a much simpler problem than global warming, so it gives one hope that we could solve this one, but they're not connected.
Okay.
The ozone layer is because of the chlorofluorocarbons that we were emitting,
Right.
so we're not emitting as much. Now, the problem is CO2, we're emitting. Reducing those is a lot more.
Okay, so they're really whole two different discussions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you see the article in the New York Times this morning about iron dust?
No, what did it say?
You'll have to look at it, bring it up next week.
Oh, you mean solving to absorb in the ocean, you mean?
Yeah.
Absorbing, yeah. Yeah, I haven't seen the article, but I'm aware of it. That's getting to geoengineering, which scares the bejesus out of me. Because of, first of all, the unintended consequences, but also, if you look at, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, if you look at, we could block solar radiation coming into the earth. Volcanoes have been doing it for millennia. It's technologically feasible. We know how to do it. Okay, we can do it. Cost. Okay, it's money, but it solves nothing because yes, you look at that energy balance that I have on our planet. So the temperatures will be stabilized, but CO2 keeps increasing. It doesn't change because you're doing that. Ocean acidification keeps going on. You got to keep putting stuff in the air. If you stop, you get a spike. But then you've got all the unintended consequences. Well, some places, and we don't know, some places are going to be flooded because of this. Some places are going to have droughts. We don't know. So it's like a Petri dish, right? Where you're doing experiments, and if you lose, whatever's on the dish, no big deal. Well, this is an experiment like no other. Our planet is the Petri dish, and we're the ones in the Petri dish. So yeah, this is a big deal if you lose us. So, but yes, there are a number of things we could do. Unfortunately, I think we're going to be forced into that, just to buy us time, for no other reason. But it's not going to be easy. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your patience. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Very important.